Carolyn Dube here, and today I'm playing with Craft Attitude. This stuff is a film, a clear film that you run through your inkjet printer, and then you can transfer that image to just about anywhere. Well, they've got all sorts of wonderful directions for you, very clear, very thorough, and of course I read them all. Okay, I read a lot of them, and yeah, I made some changes to it, but it'll make sense to you in a minute. The most important thing from the directions, though, that you need to remember is that there are two sides to this. One side is very shiny and glossy, and the other side is matte. The ink goes on the glossy, so as you're printing, it should print on the glossy side. Very important, have it print on the glossy side. Now, why did I repeat that? Because I had a hard time remembering that. So that's why I'm thinking other people may have trouble too. But that was the hardest thing about using the Craft Attitude for me. The other thing, well, enough of me talking with it this way. Why don't you see how I used it, and then it'll all make more sense what I'm about to say. So check out the rest of the video. Well, here's what I printed on the Craft Attitude. This is one of my sparks of artspiration, and I love it because it has all this color in it, but it's also got some little white spaces here and there, and I did print on the glossy side. You'll see as I peel this apart, it's really this wonderful thin clear film that I've now printed on. And I could peel it off and stick it onto something, as the directions kind of say to do, but what I'm going to do is leave it on the backing, because I'm going to put this on metal. And as I put this on metal, I wanted it to stick completely to the metal. I could have used a glue stick, I could have ironed, but I decided to run it through a Xyron machine. That'll give me a nice, even amount of adhesive everywhere, so that's what I did. It wasn't completely in the instructions, but it totally stayed with the spirit of them, of basically putting adhesive on there and then stick it to the Craft Attitude. I am going to stick it onto the glossy side. So basically the glossy side is going to be protected, sandwiched in between, because that's where the ink is on top, because that's the way I ran it through the printer. So here's my metal. This is metal that I got from Walnut Hollow. And what I'm going to do with this stuff is run through the Xyron. I'm going to pull off that protective layer, or the top layer from when you run it through the Xyron. And what I'm going to end up with is an adhesive under there. These things have basically been turned into stickers if you haven't used a Xyron machine before. You could also do this with a glue stick or spray adhesive, any of those kinds of things. You basically just need to get some adhesive all over it. Now what I'm going to do is put this right onto the Craft Attitude. So onto the glossy side, I'm going to position this metal so I can use all of my real estate and not waste anything that I've printed out. And then I'm gently going to smooth it down. If you'd like to use one of my sparks of artspiration to print out onto Craft Attitude for you to play with, you're welcome to use them for personal use. I send them out with my newsletter to my newsletter subscribers, and if you're not already signed up for my newsletter, go ahead, head over and get signed up, because there is a spark of artspiration waiting for you as soon as you confirm your membership, so you don't have to wait until my next newsletter to get started playing. So now what I'm going to do is position this other piece of foil. Now, you know me, I'm not going to measure, so I'm going to put it right up to it so I don't waste anything. And then I'm going to go to about where the edge is, and then I'm going to cut it off, because that way I don't really have to measure anything, because apparently it is like climbing Mount Everest for me to actually get a ruler out and use it with numbers and for actual measuring. This little scrap, I'm not going to waste that. Every little piece of this can become an interesting something, so I'm going to just stick that right on the edge. Well, now it's time to sort of cut these pieces apart. Yes, I'm going to save that scrap that has nothing on it. That'll be able to be used for something else. And once I've got the metal cut apart, then I'm going to pull off the backing paper, and I'll be able to completely see the design with it, with the metal shining and shimmering through. Well, now it's time to turn this metal into some birds. I'm going to start with a heavy foam mat here, and this way I just have something to rub into. I'm going to put the metal on top of the stencil. Taking a paper stump, I am just going to go over the outlines of the stencil, and this is basically creating my cut line. So instead of tracing it with a pen and then cutting it out, I'm using the stump to create the lines on the metal so I know exactly where I want to cut out. And the cool part about this, since I taped it down, is I can lift it up and peek under it and see if everything's going the way I think it should go. Once I've got an outline that I can see when I'm cutting out with scissors, then it's just a matter of cutting it out. Well, here's what the birds look like all cut out, but they're pretty flat. And one of the nice things about working with metal is that I can make them not so flat. I'm going to take one of these embossing tools, and I am simply going to give them some eyeballs and a little wing. The tail, I'm going to give a little more interest with just some simple lines. When I flip these over, it just gives them a nice little touch. I've got the shimmer of the color coming from the Craft Attitude mixing with the metal, and now they've got some dimension. Now I'm going to turn these into a card. Well, this card is starting out with some book text that I've painted yellow with acrylic paint, and I'm going to create the legs for the birds, and I'm going to use the stencil to guide me because I really love the look of these super long legs. Like that placement, well, now I want the other bird shorter, so I'm just going to use some of the legs of the bird. But I've got this great shimmer to the metal, and I want the legs to have a little more dimension to them, so I'm going to bring out one of the Pico embellishers. And what these are very fine-tipped, fine-line items. They're going to give me some dimension, but I'm going to have some control. That super fine tip, because it's got a little metal pin that you put in the top, it never clogs up for me. The black lines that are underneath it are just going to add a little more depth and shadow, so it's all working out beautifully here. And everything is going exactly as I expected in the plan. I've got the orange paint on there, the little bits are going on, those little scraps of paint on my finger, that's going on the envelope, I'm gluing down my book text. This is all turning out just the way I expected in my mind. I've got trimming off the edges, things are going really well. I got those birds, they're ready to go on there. I'm coming back in with the Pico embellisher to do a little scribble writing on it. I'm going to get those birds taped down with a little bit of the Xyron adhesive, and everything's going just as I envisioned, just as it was planned. And then I stepped away. So here's the card, and I gotta tell you, I made it earlier, I've stepped away for a little bit, come back to it, and I look at it and I go, fine. And I don't want to say fine. There's nothing really wrong with it. It's not, you know. Do you ever feel that way about something? Well, I figured out why I felt this way about it. Because I loved the birds. I loved how those worked. I love the look of the metal. I love the color on those. That's all great. But the thing that's missing for me, that's usually in everything that I do that I really like, is an oops. The closest thing I had to an oops was getting paint on the back of the card, which I actually don't call that an oops because it always happens. I don't have an oops in this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this apart. I know I want to use the birds. I really love those. But I'm going to start playing around and see if I can't make some mistakes, because every one of those mistakes is an opportunity for me. So I'm just going to say oops and see where it takes me. First step I want to do is get the birds off the card. I love them. I want to keep them really happy with those guys. How am I going to do that since I've already stuck it down? With this stuff called Undo. It's a chemical. When it sort of drips out of the top and it flows right onto where the adhesive is, it completely just sort of nullifies the adhesive. It pulls right up. But as the stuff evaporates, the stickiness on the birds will return. So they'll actually stick back down again in a few minutes. So I'm going to set those aside and out of the way, and I'm going to see what kind of a mess I can make with this card. Well, now I'm going to take these oil pastels and I'm going to start scribbling on here. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do. I thought I was going to completely cover up the legs, but then decided, nah, not going to do that. Liking how those colors are looking, I'm going to throw some white over it, and I'm just adding a bunch of layers. This already makes me so much happier than what I had before. But I'm not going to stop here. I am going to scratch. That's some kind of metal tool that I've got, some kind of little, I don't know if it's an encaustic tool. Anyway, sharp pointy metal thing. I'm scratching into that oil pastel. Decided this needed a word on it, so I added the word fly. Of course, the camera was turned off when I did it, but you get the idea. I brought back that Pico embellisher and just put the word fly in there in these wonderful textured lines. So now I've got my foil birds that are here, and I'm just going to push them down. The stickiness that was on them before is sticky once again. But I've been messing with these metal birds so much, they actually have more dimension now than when I started, because I was pulling them off and putting them down and all that kind of stuff, and I actually like that more. So all that pulling and pushing and all that stuff with it turned out to be a great oops. It was an outstanding opportunity that presented suddenly and made the birds much more interesting for me. Well, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to get some sparks of artspiration for yourself to print out and find out more about things like oops and what I'm doing, head on over to the blog, and over there you can get signed up for my free newsletter. And of course, I'd love it if you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for being a part of this colorful journey.